VLR.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you again for another edition of Truth Serum, where the Doctor of Truth is always in. I'm your host, Gerald Harrison, coming to you on a Sunday afternoon out here in sunny California, bringing you an injection of truth in the lies that we call the mainstream media. Want to just go ahead and jump right into the story. Most of the country has already known about it, but let me just go ahead and just bring it to you, True Serum style, if you will. The Cliven Bundy story out there in Nevada, where you have the Bureau of Land Management. They wanted to go ahead and run Cliven Bundy off of his ranch that he's been working for over a century, and he has basically stood up to them and said, not so. And he had a few of his countrymen come over, about several hundred, and they stood with Mr. Bundy, and they said in solidarity, not so, BLM, we will not let you have this land. And long story short, BLM backed down regarding that. Now, there is a lot of hubbub about that. And that's one of the things that I'm going to go ahead and go into. But before I do, I just wanted to go ahead and introduce my producer, Taylor. Say hi to the folks, Taylor.
Hi, folks.
Okay, and with me, my special co-host, Becca Laura, is with me. Say hi to everyone, Becca.
Hi, everyone. How are you doing? How are you doing, Gerald?
I'm doing absolutely wonderful.
Great.
Yes, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad Taylor's here. Glad to be here. But just to get into this real quick, because there's a lot of stuff concerning this particular story. It basically started where the Bureau of Land Management talked to Mr. Bundy and basically said, we need your land for XYZ, and they're saying, no, we're not willing to sell or anything. So they went out here and they had some, I wouldn't say a trumped up charge, but they basically said that, okay, Mr. Bundy, according to your records, you owe us about $1.5 million for grazing fees, because in 1993, there was a law passed saying that ranchers such as Cliven Bundy could use federal land to graze his cattle on. However, he had to pay a fee of about $1.35 or so a head. And once he found out that the money was not going to the state of Nevada, but actually going to the BLM, he basically quit paying. That was part of the story. Now, according to Dana Lash, surprisingly enough, she writes on her website at Dana Lash Radio. She says, quote, BLM has tried to argue that the rules have changed long after Bundy claims he secured rights and paid dues to Clark County, Nevada. BLM also says that they supersede whatever agreement Bundy had prior, and demanded that he reduce his living, his 1,000 Summit cattle to a tiny herd of 150. Close quote. But the interesting, they were saying this was part of the deal that they made regarding how he was going to be able to appease, if you will, the BLM. But it was just what we found out that was very interesting regarding the BLM story was not so much of Clyde Bundy being a deadbeat rancher, if you will, but the interesting part of the story is U.S. Senator Harry Reid and his son being involved in a Chinese energy deal worth about $5 billion to set up a solar farm. And the only person in the way is Clyde Bundy. Because Clyde Bundy was the last man standing out of all his contemporaries. There were many people that were ranching, working the land and being stewards and, just being normal, everyday Americans, just doing what they love to do. And through regulation and intimidation, the BLM basically got rid of Mr. Bundy's contemporaries, where he's essentially the last man standing. And right when they were the BLM was about ready to remove Bundy by force with the inclusion of seizing cattle and assets, etc., this story broke about Senator Harry Reid, and all of a sudden, the BLM has a change of heart. They decided they didn't want to go out here and hurt the patriots that were standing in solidarity with Mr. Bundy, and they wanted to make sure that everyone basically had a safe journey home, if you will. So it's one of those things where I smell a rat, to put it bluntly. I don't believe that the BLM has become all that benevolent when they had snipers and SWAT teams in place. That's a question I had to ask you, Taylor. Why would somebody from the Department of the Interior need a SWAT team complete with snipers?
You're asking the wrong person. I couldn't tell you. It's just, the same question could be asked about, what happened down here in the 1990s with Waco and David Koresh. And,
exactly.
That's a great correlation. Yeah.
It is. It is a great correlation, and I'm glad you brought that up. Because it's just very interesting that even though it was a different organization, the ATF, that dealt with the Branch Davidians, it's still the same thing. Where why do you have this metric ton reach of government power over something that is simple as just saying, "Hey guys, we want you to leave"? Why do you need that type of overreach? Now, if you haven't heard of it, the Department of Education has a SWAT team.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The Department of please explain to me what are you going to happen? You're going to have somebody rappel in tactical gear and crash through a window because Johnny couldn't figure out an algebra equation? Really? Why does the Department of Education need a SWAT team? Why does the Bureau of Land Management need a sniper team? Why do they need such heavy duty firepower? We're talking about. We're not dealing with Mexican drug cartels.
No.
We're dealing with a guy just trying to make a living, and it just so happens his living is in Harry Reid's way.
Yeah.
Give me your opinion on that, Becca. What do you think about that?
Well, I can, and this is something I didn't even mention in the prep that we did, but I used to be a constituent of Harry Reid. I briefly lived in Las Vegas, and he was my senator, and yeah, I didn't like that because you feel like you can't there's nothing that's going to change for the better. It's depressing, really, living in Nevada. But yeah, I've just that small side note, but yeah, I really don't understand why some of those departments need heavy firepower. I heard, I didn't follow the story all that much, but I do know that people were tased. There was something about a pregnant woman being assaulted,
There was
possibly.
video.
Is
There
there
is
video
video,
of that?
and I have
Okay.
seen the video.
Okay.
I've seen the video. Matter of fact, the person that was tased was Clyde Bundy's son. He got tased by the Bureau of Land Management because he got, quote, too close to them. And meaning one of them had a canine unit.
Right. So
Okay,
yeah,
so
he's not going to be any kind of threat
exactly.
if
But
someone has a dog. Right.
here's the
canine.
question.
Yeah.
Why does the Bureau of Land Management need a canine unit? And here's even a more interesting question. According to Bureau of Land Management's grooming standards, everyone needed to be clean shaven. Yet in the video, you've seen at least two men, one of them with the canine unit, that had full beards.
That is interesting.
That speaks of special forces. That speaks of mercenaries. That speaks of something more than just benevolent government saying, could you please get off the land? This is what we're dealing with, ladies and gentlemen. We're dealing with far worse than an overreaching government that's just saying, well, we just don't like the way you live. We want you to be in these little pods in like a futuristic Logan's Run. No, this is worse than this.
What were you going to say, Taylor?
I'm sorry, Taylor, were you saying something?
Yeah, my only concern about the Chinese solar farm
Mm-hmm.
and where it's located, and saying, okay, it's going to be here, it's going to be here. My only concern for that has to be who first reported it.
I'm sorry?
It has to be who first reported it, which is InfoWars. And I have no doubt that Harry Reid is trying to get the Chinese solar farm. I'm not sure about the location. And InfoWars, they do, they will get, and again, this is just my opinion. I'm only speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for work. I'm not speaking for parents, sisters, coworkers, Liz, my cat. Did I cover everyone?
I think you could speak for your cat, but maybe I might
Yeah.
be overreaching there. But,
Yeah, well, we all know that, I don't own her, she owns me.
Right.
But I'm just, with Alex Jones's stuff, I always take it with a grain of salt.
I
Oh,
can
of course.
understand that.
Huh?
Yeah.
I can understand that.
Yeah,
We're on the same page.
he's gotten stuff. And you know something. There's times where he's gotten stuff, and it's just like, wow, he's close. He's almost got it here. He's got some points here, and there are other times where it's just like, come on, Alex, chill. So the solar farm, is Harry Reid trying to get a solar farm in Nevada? More than likely. I think there's been enough legitimate coverage of that. Is it at the Bundy Ranch site? I don't know. And so
There
that's
isn't necessarily a second source yet. That's interesting.
and that's my info, because everybody's citing InfoWars, and that's my problem with it, is that they're
Well,
citing.
And it's
here's-
been a whole day.
Here's the
It's been a
thing.
whole day too, and there hasn't been another source. That's important. That is
Now-
important to point
Now,
out.
and to your point, according to the Blaze, it's a $5 billion solar farm that is supposedly supposedly going to be in Laughlin and not in Bunkerville. Now,
Laughlin is definitely different from.
oh yeah, absolutely.
It's further away.
According to this, it's 177 miles away from Bunkerville. Now, that is not to say that Harry Reid is not looking at this as possibly either an alternative, number one, or a site where phase 2 of this farm can come up.
But that's still speculation.
Very much speculation. Very much speculation.
Okay.
Absolutely. It's not, but remember, remember who we're dealing with. We're not dealing with somebody who is honest as pure driven snow.
Oh yeah.
We're dealing with Harry Reid.
Oh yeah.
Okay? We're dealing with his son, who works at the most prestigious law firm in Vegas as a principal attorney. And it's like I said, that's the kind of thing to make you say, I smell a rat.
Right.
So even though it may not be exactly at the Bundy Ranch, the fact that it's less than 200 miles away, considering you're talking about putting down a solar farm, it's one of those things where that's kind of close enough. And because remember, what's the purpose of a solar farm? To collect the sun's rays to turn it into electricity for the purposes of what? Fueling not fueling, but providing electricity for a city normally.
Yeah.
That's what solar farms do.
Right.
Okay.
Or homes, but yeah.
Or homes.
Right.
Home cities, that sort of thing. People where you have a concentration of a big population, or of a population center.
Right.
Large or small makes no difference. But here's the point: when you're dealing with a population as big as Las Vegas, and knowing that they have a insatiable need for electricity, and knowing that you can't go out here and just kind of take your little witching stick and boom, there's some water. So we'll just build a dam right there 3 miles outside the city limits in Henderson. So you can't do that. So you have to go out here and you have to go out here and get some type of way to be able to do a large scale way of collecting and generating electricity without water, and that was one of the things I think we talked about the other day, Taylor, that dams are one of the easiest ways of electricity. Matter of fact, I think I heard it on the last night on the Cigar Lounge.
Mm-hmm.
Well, like I said, it's not like you can take your little witching stick and say, "Oh, there's some water there," and make a dam. So the way you're going to do that is how you use a solar farm where you're dealing in a desert with 118-degree heat on an off day, and collect all this sunlight so you can generate electricity. So you need to have title free and clear in order to be able to do that. And part of that, and so even in that case, even at the fact that you're dealing with you're dealing with the principal site being in Laughlin, a secondary site less than 200 miles away is like I said, it's not far fetched. It really isn't.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, you're right.
so I'm looking. So that's why I'm kind of looking at it and saying, yeah, it sounds almost kind of conspiracy theorist, and it'll kind of go into my last point regarding this story, and then we can go ahead and move on. One of the things that I found kind of interesting over the last 3 months or so, since the beginning of the year, we all know about the story about the Connecticut State Trooper Lieutenant Vance and all that, what he's doing, and basically how the state is basically going completely draconian and want everyone to register their firearms so at a later date they can confiscate them. Well, you start to ask yourself these kind of questions, and like I said, forgive me for being a little tinfoil hat Alex Jonesy for a minute, but I'm going to go ahead and do this anyway. It's my show, and I can do what I want. Connecticut, well, every state in the union has a nickname. For example, California, where I'm from, is known as the Golden State. Nevada is known as the Silver State. Connecticut is known as what? The Constitution State. Now, what does that have to do with Clive Bundy? Very simple. Clive Bundy lives in Bunkerville, Nevada. Sounds a whole lot like Bunker Hill, Nevada. What I'm suggesting is there may be in the not too distant future some type of a all-out assault on our Constitution and completely change America as we know it. And the reason why I would say that is because if you go back to 2001, why would they launch the attack on September 11? Because of the numbers that it represents. What do we call for an emergency? 911. So it's just something that I know it sounds a little far-fetched, a little weird, but it's just something that it just makes you say, could it happen? Maybe. But it's just a little food for thought that I wanted to give you. But moving on.
Yeah, moving on. Yeah.
Most of us have probably gone and ate our lunch, and now we have people that want to go out here and tell our children what to have for lunch. You know anything about that, Becca?
I do. I know a little bit about that. This last week, I started as an editor at an independentjournalreview.com, and one of our
neighborhood newspaper.
That neighborhood newspaper, and I love when you say that. And one of our stories this weekend was by Justin Charters, one of our newer writers, and the headline is Michelle Obama's Smart Snacks ban on all junk food in public schools soon to go into effect. And what it says is the kids are not even going to be able to go to a vending machine if they have a little store, for the students to buy rulers or, things like that, or the little thing of Doritos. They're not going to be able to do that It's like the next part of her food regimen, I guess, for our America's children. And I just thought it was um, just amazing. It's just moving forward, and also he points out in the piece about how hypocritical the Obamas are. It links to one of the other stories we have about how they are not very hidden about their own dietary um, you know what they eat. They don't exactly sit and eat sticks of celery and carrots. You know,
they're not the Berenstein Bears.
no, they're not the Bears. So definitely. And Justin goes on to say, how do I know this? How do I know that this isn't going to go over well with kids? Well, he had told his 15-year-old brother, Ivan, that this is going to go into effect. And his response was, it won't work. It's stupid. You won't be able to control it. The only way you'll be able to control it is if you searched everyone's lunch and had chaperones for every student. And unless you're going to incentivize students to spy on each other, I don't see it happening. And if it does, I'll rebel. And I personally think it's and here's a part in our pre-show. I mentioned this to Gerald. I was reading part of it to Gerald, and Mrs. Obama. Some people may be aware of this. Has said that obesity in our children is a national security issue.
Say that again.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Obesity, poor nutrition and obesity is a national security issue, according to the First Lady. And I think that to a progressive, it might be, because they think that they're in charge, that they have to say what's proper for kids, that, instead of their parents. And if they don't have it if they don't have it in check, they don't have obesity or nutrition in check, then I don't know. I guess to them that constitutes a national security threat.
Well, here's why she said it, and I don't. I mean, here's why she said it, and it's still kind of weird that she put it this way.
Mm-hmm.
She said, and the question was made by Dr. Oz. Dr. Oz was the one who made this question, and Obama's reply was, this was from 2012. Michelle Obama's reply was, well, absolutely, shocking information. I do a lot of work with military families and spend a lot of time on military bases, and the number one thing that prevents young people from the ages of 17 to 24 qualifying for the military is obesity. The military is taking this very seriously, and they've implemented some really fascinating and successful programs. So they have found that they've got to do a whole lot of re-educating in the military just to get soldiers ready for combat. So yes, it is absolutely a security issue for our country. Okay,
Where do I begin?
Yeah, for one, I think it kind of shows that that the military is letting too many people in. They don't have the standards that they used to have.
Oh no!
When I was 19 years old, I tried to join the Navy because I've always wanted to be in the Navy. And yes, it had totally to do with wanting to fly an F-14 Tomcat. I've never watched Top Gun all the way through, but so I didn't get it from there. I was a G.I. Joe guy.
Cool.
But when I went to the local recruiter, they said, "Hey, do you have any issues? Any issues when it comes to your health?" And I said, "Well, I've got back problems that have been going on for several years."
Okay.
And they said, you know something, then I'm just going to tell you right now, we're not going to take you.
Wow.
Yeah, and I can understand that, especially if you wanted to be a pilot.
Yeah. Well, even then, they weren't going to. I mean, they weren't going to take me even if I wanted to be a pilot, or even if I didn't want to be a pilot.
Didn't want to be.
So,
Wow.
so what does that say? The standards have gotten extremely low. They're taking everyone in. Now, a part of it is because we, despite what folks may want to, what some folks may want to say, we are technically still at war.
Oh yeah.
The Afghanistan war is still going on. The
Well,
so
that we haven't really remember. It's more of a police action. It's not a war, technically.
Well, no, Congress did declare war.
I don't remember them declaring war, so
They
forgive
did.
me. But, okay.
They did. They did. We are technically we are technically still at war. We had we had what went on in Iraq. We had we had all of that. But at the same time, I just have questions about this. So,
Hmm.
um, so yeah, that's what I have about that.
Well, what questions do you have? Just kind of elaborate on one or two of them.
Okay, the questions that I have, and forgive me for losing my train of thought. I had Lee Stranahan ask me a question. Um, was the question that I have about calling it a national security threat
Oh yeah.
is the job of the military is to get people in super shape. I mean, isn't that like part of the joke that always runs in there is that is that you always have the one guy who's overweight, and the big thing is when he finally gets to the right weight that he's supposed to be. I'm all for people living healthy. I'm all for people being healthy. I'm not sure it ought to be government mandated.
Yeah.
No, it shouldn't be. And here's the reason. And this is where I can understand Becca's point of view regarding what the progressives think. Um, that that this is a national security issue because they don't have control. Well, the problem is, they don't have. They're trying to exercise this over the civilian population. They
Yeah.
don't have control over the civilian population. Therein lies the problem because they don't have control. Now she goes out here and she talks about the military. Well, yeah, anybody who's a service member understands that when you're part of the military, they'll make it very clear to you you are considered property of the United States government. Period. End of story. And because of that, they'll go out here and they'll do all the kind of stuff to you as a service member because they can. Now, regarding the civilian population, they're trying to go out here and override the freedom of choice that the civilian population has, which will create, as crazy as this is going to sound, a snack black market where you're going to have the Sinaloa school cartel lurking in the shadows and say, "Want some Doritos?"
How soon until we have a teacher arrested not for a legitimate issue like having sex with a student, but for providing snacks to a student?
It's going to happen. That's a great question. I want to mention this before we bring Lee on. There's actually some breaking news, and it kind of relates to what he's going to be talking about in a way. Unfortunately, there was a shooting in Kansas City. Shootings at Jewish centers in Kansas City leave 3 dead, and this guy, I've seen a couple different things on Twitter. I'm just going to say what I'm seeing in USA Today because
Sure.
you see a lot of things on Twitter. At least 3 people were killed, 1 injured Sunday when a shooter opened fire on a Jewish community center and retirement home in suburban Kansas City. Overland Park, Kansas police were questioning a suspect after the incident, which occurred at about 1 p.m. at the Jewish Community Center complex in Overland Park and Village Shalom, a retirement community located nearby. Police arrested, I'm just going to read this one more part. Police arrested a suspect at an elementary school in the area. The suspect reportedly yelled out Heil Hitler as he was led away by police. Yeah. So, yeah, we definitely have people that kill because they disagree with religion. They disagree with people's religion, whether they're Jewish or Christian. And that's like that just happened in the last hour.
Well, that's one of the things that I wanted to go ahead and even have, if it's even possible to be able to have. I wanted to have my next guest be able to go ahead and talk about that.
He might be able to.
Tell you what, let's take a real quick break. Let us take a real quick break, and we will be right back. You are listening to Truth Serum here on Vigilant Liberty Radio. Your host is
Gerald Harrison, giving you the injection of truth in a sea of lies that we call the mainstream media.
Your special guest co-host is
Becca Lore.
And
Becca
your
Lore.
producer is Taylor. So we'll be right back right after this.
We want to welcome Michael Moore to Occupy Wall Street. I'm so impressed by what I'm seeing here.
How much of people's income do you, Michael Moore, want the government to confiscate?
Probably twice what we're paying right now.
It's not envy, it's war.
Where's the rage? Where's the uprising?
Storm the doors of the New York Stock Exchange.
It is a class war.
If the wealthy paid their fair share. For a documentary filmmaker, I do really well. I'm very blessed.
And the rich thought poverty was bad.
I do well.
They get rid of it.
What pure? There's nothing pure about capitalism.
And they know what's coming on Wall Street.
We're seeing the end of capitalism. And I say good riddance.
He is one of my favorite capitalists. Yeah, I want to give him a hug.
This is Lachlan Marquet of the Washington Free Beacon, and you are listening to Vigilant Liberty Radio.
He says he doesn't have a horse in this race, but Retractor knows he does. Now he's got egg on his face. The donkeys on the left got owned by a kid. They can say it was a crime, but Retractor knows what he did.
Well, welcome back to Truth Serum. This is the co-host, Becca Lower. And we have our guest, Lee Stranahan. And as I was talking right before the break, there is breaking news today in Kansas of a man went to a Jewish community center complex and a retirement home and shot 3 people. There were some people who are wounded. And reportedly, as he was led away, he was yelling Heil Hitler. And there are other things I've seen on Twitter that I'm not going to repeat because you don't know what's true, what's not. But I think that leads in well to Lee and his film. He's doing a short film called Saving Kassab, which is going to be part of a larger film called the Caliphate, and we'll talk some about that. But Lee, welcome to Vigilant Liberty Radio and to Truth Serum.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
No problem. Just to let people know, just really briefly, your film, The Caliphate, there's a lot to it. It not only is about the persecution of Christians in the Middle East, but also is about, just a way to put it is the way that our own government is complicit in Al Qaeda, destroying villages there and persecuting Christians. And also, you're also looking into what actually happened at Benghazi, too.
Well, yeah, you can't. It's almost like there's a news blackout in this country on it. When I listen to international news sources like the BBC or Deutsche Welle in Germany, they seem to be covering what's going on in Syria a lot more than we are in the United States. And I think that part of that is that the refugee crisis that's happening, which is one of the largest refugee crises in history. Right now, let's put some numbers on it. Right now in Lebanon, for instance, small Middle Eastern country, 1 out of every 5 people in the country is a Syrian refugee. I'll say that again. 1 out of every 5 people is a Syrian refugee, 20% of the population.
It just reached like 1 million people just very recently, didn't it?
And it did, but that's only the official UN number. That's the number because when I was in Lebanon back in September, I interviewed people from the UNHCR, and those are only the people who register with the UN has passed 1 million. But there's a lot of people who don't register with the UN because you don't need to register with the UN. You only register with the UN if you want assistance. But most of the Christians have not registered with the UN. Most of the Christians have gone into Lebanon and found work or are staying with people and that kind of thing. And they're not going the UN route. So there's really actually a lot more than 1 million. And like I say, it's a very small country. So the refugees, the reason I say that the people in Europe are covering it more is because Europe's obviously much closer to the Middle East. And therefore, the refugees are streaming into those countries. But it's a huge problem. And, when we talk about the term persecution of Christians, that's a term that gets thrown around quite a bit. Mm. And it means everything from, the contraceptive mandate that's in Obamacare to, but people do use it that way.
No, you're right.
To the war on Christmas. But what we're talking about in the Middle East is people being murdered. Let's just be, really as clear as we can. It's people being murdered, kidnapped, raped, driven from their homes. And that's the explicit goal. And because the perpetrators are Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda related jihadists, jihadists broadly, Muslims who follow a very strict fundamentalist interpretation of Islam and require everybody else to as well, Muslims or Christians, but because they're brutal to the Muslims who don't follow it either. But because the bad guys are jihadists, we're not covering it. So it's a combination of it's not affecting us and political correctness, I think, those two things factoring in,
Mm-hmm.
Now, Lee, it's interesting that you brought that up, that you think that political correctness, the fact that we essentially, like the Muslims here in the United States, is a reason why it's kind of a media blackout. Given the story, and I don't know if you have even followed it to a certain degree, of what has transpired over the last week concerning Clive Bundy and the BLM, would it be safe to say that in places where people's rights, whether they're constitutional or human rights that are suspended or just absolutely revoked, would it be safe to say that religious persecution would soon follow?
Well, I've been barely following the Bundy case. I've been traveling most of the last week. But that being said, though, let me respond to the question broadly. I would reverse it, actually. I think that when you attack people's religious liberty,
okay, that
then the rest of the liberties are quickly going to follow. I think that there's in other words, would put the religious liberties as, in a sense, more fundamental, because it's a broadly speaking, it's a form of collectivism.
Yes.
We've seen this if you look at the big body counts that have been piled up in human history through tyrannical governments, the forced atheist regimes such as the Soviet Union, China, they're big on that list. They're the top of that list, actually.
Sure.
And I don't think it's an accident. I don't think it's an accident. I think when you completely remove spirituality from the equation, what you get is what we've seen over and over and over again. And I'm not talking about individual atheists. Everybody knows people who don't believe in God or whatever, and they're not all running around killing people or anything like that. But when it comes to the big numbers, when it comes to how societies operate, the evidence is in and it's clear. And it's also true about Islam. What I say to people is, and again, this is nothing against individual Muslims. When I was in the Middle East, I met any number of great Muslims, wonderful people.
Sure.
Very, very in reality, much more in reality about it than the average American liberal, by the way. And they don't suffer from political correctness. They're Muslim, but they're willing to say, these guys, a cab driver said to me about Al Qaeda, he said, these guys are too Muslim. That was his quote. And they don't, like you say, they don't have the luxury that elite liberals, do of doing that. But what I say to people is like, look at the freedom, because people in this country try to reduce it to, oh, well, you're Islamophobic, you hate. I don't. First off, I'm a Christian. I don't hate anybody. Broadly, in a broad sense, I don't hate anybody. And in a more specific sense, I absolutely don't hate individual Muslims. However, it is insane to not look at the big numbers. The evidence is in. The countries that are most free are Christian countries. The countries that are most unfree, where women have less rights. If you want to talk about gay rights, okay, let's talk about that. There's about 6 countries where homosexuality has the death penalty, and they're all Muslim. They're all Muslim countries, and even in a country,
one,
well,
would be Uganda.
I don't think even with the laws that they just passed there, I don't think was the death penalty on it, or was it harsher?
No,
okay.
The death penalty. So my understanding that the death penalty it was something that they had since 2009.
No, that's not accurate. By the way, that's absolutely not accurate. In fact, I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the reporting on it and double check.
Okay.
But I got to point out that even when Uganda was trying to do that, they had the Pope saying to them, "Stop! Don't do that." Right?
Okay.
They didn't have any Muslim imams stepping up to tell them not to do it. So Uganda, like people who attack Christians, love to throw up Uganda as an example. I'm just telling you, there's a lot of inaccurate reporting. When I looked into this a year ago, there were the only countries that had the death penalty were Islamic countries, and the controversy was that Uganda was trying to get harsher penalties.
Okay.
And some of those harsher penalties, by the way, even in Uganda, were not for homosexuality, but they were for like homosexual pedophilia. Okay.
Okay.
So let's just be clear on that. Like I say, people like to throw that up, but we know where the countries are where just being gay
Right.
Just being gay will get you killed, or being a woman and going out without your hijab on will get you stoned to death, or where there are honor killings. We know where those countries are by and large, and like I say, it's not even controversial within the Muslim world that happens. There's not the equivalent of the Pope or a bishop or anybody really protesting it. There's a few liberals. So I think the religious issue is actually, like I say, more fundamental. That it's if they can take that away, then all bets are off. And we've seen that over and over again. So it's really based historically.
I can confirm the death penalty is not in the Ugandan bill.
Good.
Thanks. Yeah. Like I said, but I understand, Gerald, why you think that, because the left really loves to push that. In fact, the people who talk about that, I don't see them talking about the Muslim countries.
Exactly. And just to kind of dovetail off your point about religious persecution being more front and center than, say, political persecution, would it be safe to say that even in this country, where you have, for example, the baker in New Mexico that would not bake the cake for a lesbian couple and was told by a judge that you must do that, or no, I'm sorry, not the cake, the photographer that was in New Mexico, the cake was in Washington State. Would you consider that a precursor to the political persecution that, say, Clive Bundy is suffering, and in my opinion, will eventually have a lot of Americans suffer?
Well, here's where the danger is with these private businesses cases.
I'm sorry, Lee, you still there?
Yes. Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah,
it dropped out for a second.
Okay. So it's this technology. Hi,
NSA.
Here's the here's the danger, I think, of cases like the photographer case or the cake case. And I don't think the danger is in those individual cases, but it's the precedent that's already in place. The Obama administration has already taken a number of steps in court to reduce what they want to do. The goal is they want to be able to sue the Catholic Church. This is the end run. They want to be able to sue the Catholic Church or a Baptist church for not performing a wedding. That's where this is headed. It is not about the cake. It's not about the photographer. It's about the long-term agenda here of being able to sue a church and say to them, look, you Catholic Church cannot discriminate against the same-sex couple. And part of that, and by the way, what they may be going for, and I have mixed feelings on this next issue. Part of what they may be going for is just the goal of taking away tax-exempt status for religion. I've heard people argue, and again, I'm not sure a religious organization being tax-exempt may or may not make sense to me. In other words, I don't know. Like I said, to me, I don't necessarily see. I can see both sides of that argument. However, and by the way, this is where a lot of these arguments are headed, because what they're going to say ultimately is, look, you have a tax-exempt status, therefore you can't. Therefore, since you're being given this privilege, what they're going to do is they're going to frame it as the government granting them a privilege. Like we're giving you this privilege of, and you can actually see that parallel in the Bundy case right now. In that case, a little bit I know about it. It's part of it is just the massive amount of federally held public lands in the West that are all under federal control. So what they do is if they can reverse the situation, so your rights aren't inalienable, but your rights are granted by the state.
Exactly.
Okay? If they can do that, then there's a lot that they can get away with. So I can see both sides in the case of taxation on churches. Like I said, I mean, to me, it's not out of the realm of possibility churches should pay some taxes or whatever. However, I'm also not in favor of increasing the government's ability to tax anybody right now. In other words, in a rational government, you could make the case to me that churches should be taxed like any other business or nonprofit, or you know what I'm saying, like that they don't necessarily fit in a special category, because we already have cases where people say, "Oh, I'm a church." I'm thinking of Scientology here. By declaring themselves a church, they try to get some of the statuses that traditional churches have. And, again, you can make an argument for that. But what you can't make the argument for me, what's very clear, is that in a number of court decisions, the Obama administration has been setting themselves up to be able to press that case against churches. They haven't done it yet, because we're not quite there yet. We're not quite there at a point where same-sex marriage is still not, it's still in a minority of states, for instance, right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
But I think I think it's relatively clear we're at a point where that is only going to hold for so long. We're at a point within 10 years, let's say, it's pretty clear to me that the majority of states are going to have same-sex marriage. And that's when it's going to be interesting to see what an Obama administration, or more likely a Clinton administration by that point, is able to do, assuming the Republicans can't take the White House in 2016. If they can, it'll stave it off for a few years.
Well, it's just one of those things that, and just to make this point, and then we can jump back into your movie. It's one of those things that most people have seemed to have forgotten, or it just either wasn't considered newsworthy or not, was the Employee Non-Discrimination Act that came about 4 years ago. And this was something that the director and still director of the Equal Employment Occupational or Opportunity Commission, Chai Fieldblum, who is a out lesbian, made it clear that says gays win, Christians lose when it comes to this piece of legislation.
Yeah, and that's where, like I said, I mean, to me, I tend to be a libertarian-leaning conservative. So, in one sense, I don't really care what people do in the bedroom, and I think the government should stay out of that.
I agree.
But there's also a political agenda, and I think, my friend Andrew Breitbart made this point to me when we used to discuss this issue. He said, look, if you're gay, he said, civil unions were a done deal. You could have civil unions, but that wasn't what that wasn't what the liberal homosexual political agenda was about. And again, I'm specifying liberal here, where it was about acquiring extra rights. And what they, so there's something going on where, like I say, I mean, to me, you could, and again, I look at a same-sex marriage, I go, okay, well, when it comes to inheritance rights or hospital visits or whatever, I don't really talk to a lot of people who, even hardcore conservatives on the issue. They don't care about hospital visits, right? I've never met anybody who's like, no, if you're gay, you definitely can't visit someone you're in the. No, I've never met anybody who said that. Maybe they're out there, but I've never met them. It's about everything else. It's about everything else. And it's about the questions that nobody's even asked about how this affects traditional marriage. For instance, just a simple example. They've done surveys, particularly among gay men. It's different with gay women. But with gay men, gay men are typically not monogamous. Even if they're in a long-term relationship, they're not monogamous. And they're explicitly not monogamous. It's not like they cheat. They're just not monogamous. It's not something that they do. So people talk about, and conservatives, Rick Santorum is an example, he gets made fun of all the time for talking about for even asking the question, what's the effect going to be on traditional marriage? And people go, well, if you marry somebody and they're the same sex, how does that affect you? Well, the question is really it doesn't affect me, but how does it affect the idea of what marriage is? So, okay, so we've taken out gender roles, so it doesn't mean that anymore. Well, how about monogamy? Is that part of what marriage is? Is that just off the table? In other words, at a certain point, if you start knocking down everything that traditional marriage is, you're left with nothing. And when, like I say, I mean, even just asking the question, okay, well, how does this affect monogamy? So, or for instance, in traditional marriage, a lot of people, one of the reasons some people get married is because they don't have sex until they're married, right? Okay, well, is that what's going on in same-sex marriage? Is that a thing? I don't think that's the thing. I don't think that's the thing that's going on. I don't think there are same-sex couples who are like, well, no, we're going to wait to have sex until we get married. Then when you take, like I say, and obviously there's an assault on. You can see it with the other decision that worries me, not just as we homeschool, but it's the Holder decision on homeschooling that happened recently, where there was a German immigrant family who moved here because Germany is so repressive about homeschooling, and they're Christians, and the Holder administration, the Obama administration, the Holder DOJ, said that there's no such thing as the right to educate your children. That's really frightening. That decision is really, really frightening. And what they're doing, in my opinion, is they're setting up things. They're not going to be the ones to do it, but they're setting things up for a series of decisions that happen in the future that are going to be mind-boggling.
Right, and I can see, Lee, how that homeschooling decision relates to the family unit, to the right to have something mean something, have the word family mean something, have spouse, have marriage mean what it has traditionally meant. And so that's great. I do have a question. So we can go back to your film. What did you hear from people when you went to Lebanon? Because you went in September and October, parts of September and October last year, to be able to see the refugees. Obviously, it wasn't safe for journalists to go to Syria, but there are a lot, as you mentioned, a lot of the refugees that were there in Lebanon, in Beirut, Lebanon. What did the religious community, I know that you spoke to different leaders there, say about what the U.S. role is in Syria and the real threat that Christians are under over there?
Well, first off, everybody over there is aware of the threat to Christianity. And I spoke to people from the head of the Iraqi Catholic Church, Louis Sacco, who's the Patriarch of Babylon, to an archbishop who's Syrian in the Maronite Catholic Church in Lebanon. And I've read stuff that even, for instance, a prince in Jordan, a Muslim prince in Jordan, held a conference on the threat to Christianity in the Middle East. By the way, got no press here. But I'm going to say that again. A Muslim prince from Jordan held a conference on the threat to Christianity, where he said very clearly, it's not just Christians who are under threat there, it's Christianity. And everybody there is keenly aware of the threat to Christianity as a whole, where the Al-Qaeda aligned jihadist groups, al-Nusra, ISIS, are literally trying to remove Christianity from Syria and from the Middle East in general. They're trying to push all of the Christians into Lebanon, if they can do that, because they want to create a powder keg in Lebanon. And when I say that, when the Syrian revolution started, the Arab Spring for Syria started, the next day they were saying, Christians to Lebanon, Jews to the grave. That's what they were chanting. This was on day 2. So they said exactly what they wanted to do. The Muslim Brotherhood in Syria was saying they want to move Christians to Lebanon. That's what they've done. And Jews to the grave, that's just how they talk. I mean, they mean it, but it wasn't like Syria was full of Jews or anything like that. So that was more just hyped up, crazy rhetoric. But it's but the Christians to Lebanon, that's exactly what they've done. And again, I've been working on this project about 6 months now. It's been incredibly frustrating. We have this film, Saving Qassab. We put it up about 10 days ago, right after Kim Kardashian had come out and talked about Qassab. Qassab is a town in Syria. Armenian Christians, once again, as they've done before, in city after city and village after village, the jihadists come in and they clear out the Christians. So Kim Kardashian tweeted about it to her, 11 million, 3 million, whatever it is, gigantic number of followers. So I'm like, okay, here we go. Finally, someone who the American media seems to pay attention to, not judging, just saying, is talking about this issue. And they completely ignored it again. So we've raised, you can go up and see it, at Saving Qassab right now, we've raised about $300 to cover this issue. Now, I got to say, the Bundy thing, to me, it's another example of what I do see. Whatever's going on there, Christianity is not at risk there. People aren't being murdered and raped and kidnapped there. And it's the same way with the plane that was lost, the 370. Obviously, huge tragedy, a couple hundred people lost. It's very bad. But it's not Christianity being pushed off where the birthplace of Christianity is. Let's go over that, too. There's a reason they're trying to get rid of it in the Middle East. This is not trying to get rid of Christianity in South Dakota. This is trying to get rid of Christianity at the birthplace of Christianity. Okay? Syria, if you read the Bible, it comes up a few times. And so it is not accidental that they're trying to push Christianity off the map. And what I see is an American public that is, by and large, hooked on whatever the latest shiny thing is. And it varies. It goes on. In the meantime, since I left Lebanon in September, there have been at least 4 suicide bombings in Beirut, in the city of Beirut alone. Hundreds of thousands of more Syrians have been pushed out. And the U.S. is backing, the U.S. government is backing the people who are murdering Christians. Real briefly, the situation is there's Bashar al-Assad on one side and the people against Assad on the other side, and they are either aligned with or subject to al-Qaeda. Now, there are elements who are opposed to Assad who may want something different. They have no power. There are elements opposed to Assad who may be better. They have no power. And if Assad falls, let's just be really clear, if Assad falls, nobody has ever demonstrated that anything will happen, but al-Qaeda will take over Syria. That's 100% clear. But the U.S.'s only policy when we had peace talks recently in Geneva was to get rid of Assad. And this is exactly the same thing that happened in Egypt, where we pushed the Muslim Brotherhood into power. Disaster happened. And disaster, especially for the Christians, happened. And guess what? The U.S. has never learned from that mistake. And it's happened over and over again. We got rid of Gaddafi in Libya when Gaddafi was helping us fight al-Qaeda at the time. And again, none of these guys are awesome. Hosni Mubarak, not great. Bashar al-Assad, not great. These are all bad guys. But the alternative is worse. And it's not accidental, I don't think, that the Obama administration keeps pushing it. But I've got to say that to raise $325 on an Indiegogo project where it's all transparent, people see where the money is and everything else, it's depressing. I don't know how else to say it. It's very, very, very depressing. And I have gone into debt. I've had to take out 2 loans in the past few months to keep going on this project. I was just in Washington. I got interviews with some of the people I wanted to get interviews with: Frank Gaffney, Claire Lopez, David Raboy. I see the spine of the film The Caliphate. I have the material to start to make it. And but the fact that I see the fundraising that goes on, and Becca knows that Becca and I are friends. So Becca knows what I complain about all the time. But I mean, there's a large Tea Party group raising money to draft Sarah Palin right now. And Sarah Palin has said that she's not going to run for Senate. So it's a scheme of some kind. They're trying to raise money based on that idea. I guarantee you they raised thousands and thousands of dollars yesterday on that scheme. And meanwhile, we've got 325 in when people are being murdered. So it's depressing to me. And I don't,
that's definitely why I had you on.
Yeah.
Is that more people need to hear what it is that you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. And with your permission, Lee, Taylor,
Sure.
I'd like to go ahead and roll that clip. We have a clip from Indiegogo, and we're going to go ahead and roll it on Truth Serum.
Sure, yeah.
Hi there, my name's Lee Stranahan. I'm a writer and filmmaker based in Dallas, Texas. And so many times in our lives, we have to choose between what's important and what's urgent. The urgent stuff, getting the kids to school, getting a project done at work, and what's really important. And in this case, I want to talk to you about a project that's both urgent and important. A few days ago, I started seeing reports about attacks on a Syrian village called Kasab. And I saw that Armenian Christians were being driven out of the village by rebels. This is part of the Syrian war. And when I saw this happening, I was reporting on it on my website, Stranahan.com. I thought to myself, oh no, here it goes again. It's happening again. And the reason I thought that is that for about 6 months now, I've been reporting on the attacks against Christians in this Syrian war, in this Syrian conflict. I started with the village of Malula, a small Christian village, one of the last places where Aramaic is spoken. And these rebels had attacked that village. And the weird thing about all of this is that the United States is actually backing the people who are killing Christians and driving them out of these towns and villages in Syria. Now, Kasab is just the latest example. And in this case, it's Armenian Christians who were driven out of the town. And there's video up. You can find it on YouTube. I posted it at Stranahan.com. And when I saw what was happening in Malula 6 months ago, I felt called to go over to the Middle East. I raised money. We went to Lebanon. I interviewed the head of the Iraqi Catholic Church. I interviewed an archbishop from the Syrian Maronite Church. I interviewed survivors of the attack on Malula. I interviewed people who've been driven from the Syrian town of Aleppo. And their stories were amazing and heartbreaking and really important. And now that I see what's happening in Kasab, I have to go back. I need to get on a plane in about a week or 10 days to get over there to talk to the survivors of Kasab. The difference in Kasab right now is that the Armenians in America and elsewhere are really fighting back. They've started a Save Kasab campaign, and even celebrities like Kim Kardashian have used her celebrity, the 20 million followers she has on Twitter to get the word out. So I think we might be at a point where we can start to, the urgent situation is what's happening in Kasab. The important thing is that Christians in the whole region are being driven out, are being kidnapped, killed, and murdered. I need your help with this project. We need to raise the money, and I want to get a short film that we're going to put free up on YouTube and Vimeo and everywhere else. I want to get it done by the end of April. That means I need to get on a plane in 10 days. I need to talk to survivors. I need to come back and I need to edit it and then get this project up right away. Please, even if you wonder why this affects you, the people doing the killing here are Al-Qaeda affiliated rebels. They want to use Syria as Al-Qaeda's next base of operation. And that means what happens in Syria won't stay in Syria. Please support me on this project.
And once again, we're back with Truth Serum, and I'm here with Gerald Harrison, with my co-host Becca Laura, and my special guest Lee Stranahan, former writer of Breitbart.com, is now actually doing independent film. One of them is Saving Kasab, and the other one being The Caliphate. Lee, I wanted to go ahead and just again just try to be able to give a synopsis of the film, of how do the two films tie together, or are the films completely separate?
Well, we're 36 hours, I think, something like that, from the end of the fundraising on Saving Kasab, which, and we're only about $16,000 away from goal. So we're a huge gap between what I wanted to raise to do it. So I think that what the Saving Kasab short film is going to end up being, and I'm going to write to everybody who donated and talk to them about it. But at this point, for instance, I can't get to the Middle East, right? There's no money to get to the Middle East. There's barely money to the money barely. We didn't cover the trip to Washington D.C. we made last week, where I was in Washington D.C. and even though sleeping on couches most of the night, there's expenses every day just getting around. For instance, so the Kasab thing is going to be part of the larger film, The Caliphate. But I need to see what I'm going to do on that film. If we'd raised even $5,000, let's say, that would be enough for me at least to have gotten over there just by myself, but gotten over there and started to shoot something. Now at this point, with $325, but the larger project, The Caliphate's going on regardless of that. And because the Kasab story is going to be in there, I'm just not sure where it's going to be. So I have to wait and see what we end up with. If we don't end up raising anywhere near the goal, if we end up raising very, very little money, then it's going to end up probably being more of a section in the film where we talk about it. And then if I'm able to raise the money on the Caliphate, when I go over there, I'll cover this stuff. But I'm once again, I'm sort of dumbfounded, maybe the right word, at the lack of support. I don't know how else to put it. It's because I don't take it personally. I've talked to people over and over again who were involved in the subject who say people just don't seem to care that what's happening to Christians in the Middle East. And again, I've heard this from people over and over again who've been involved in the issue, who are like, people in this country are by and large ignoring it. And what I had to talk with Frank Gaffney. People don't take the threat of Al-Qaeda seriously. And when I was at the Center for Security Policy last week, Frank and I talked about it. Fundraising for his group, incredibly difficult. So, like I say, I don't take it personally. I don't take it as rejection of me. I take it as a frightening amount of willful ignorance on the part of Americans on this issue. And I think it's unfortunately going to take another 9/11, something else, some other big terrorist act, and then people will start to pay attention to it again. Then they're going to go, gee, what happened? Why weren't we protected? Well, you know, you weren't protected because you weren't protecting yourself. And I understand that people get busy, and I understand that people only have a finite amount of things that they can do something about. But this is something that we can do something about. And I say that, and I believe it. Most Americans are not aware of what the U.S. policy on Syria is, who the players are, and what it means. And so my whole idea, and I think I've done Beck has seen some of the clips that we've got. I did an interview with Claire Lopez from the Center for Security Policy last week. And the people who donated, I showed them a sneak peek of just the raw interview footage. I'm doing a film for a general audience. You don't have to be a Christian or a conservative to watch the film.
Right, especially you're right. Especially the Lopez clip. She does a great deal of just like you said, general audience. A general audience she gets you up to speed as to what. As to the subject that she's talking about. I thought that's why I was most impressed, even though the David Reboy one was great too. The other one, it was very, very simple. And I think that's important because people don't follow what happens in Syria, what happens in Afghanistan, what happens, throughout the Middle East. I know when we were watching the clip, or when we were listening to the clip, I guess, there was something that you wanted to say about people in Christianity, or people's. There was something about Christianity that you wanted to talk about.
Were you thinking that what goes on over there in Syria has any type of biblical relevance as to goes to, say, biblical prophecy?
Well, I think what I worry about, my friend Ben Howe raised this as a possibility, because I was talking about the difficulty in raising money for the film. And, again, I look at other projects on Indiegogo. I look at the Gosnell film, for instance, where they're over $500,000. And God bless them. God bless them for doing that. And God bless them for making the film. And
sure.
I, as a filmmaker, I want all films to do well. I'm happy when films do well. I stole that line from John Voight. I met Voight about 20 years ago, actually. And we were talking about Titanic. It was right before Titanic came out. So, and he said, as a filmmaker, I want all films to do well. And I thought, how gracious of the guy. That was a very nice thing of him to say. And so I've stolen that line from Voight. So, but it's true. But it's true. That magnanimity towards other films, I have that. I want movies to do well, and I especially want conservative movies to do well. That being said, it's amazing to me that they can raise $500,000 on that, and we've had a difficult time raising. We've raised way under 10. We've raised. I mean, I have to look at the numbers, but we've probably raised, I don't know, 2,000 or 3,000 in the past 4 months, and total. Right. And it's insane because, like I say, this is not as important as I think the Gosnell thing is in a lot of ways, and I think it will have an impact on that. We're talking about an active situation here where Gosnell at least has been put away.
Sure.
Every week right now, people are dying in the Middle East. This is not a historical film. This is a active live project. And I was talking to Ben Howe about it, and he thinks that some people who are Christians may feel like, oh, well, what's going on in the Middle East is part of prophecy or whatever, so they're kind of okay with it. And I asked people on Twitter, I'm like, does anyone think that's true? And a few people were like, well, yeah, it could be. And I just think that that's a huge mistake. I mean, for one thing, that's for God to figure out. It's not for you to figure out. In other words, are we at end times or whatever? You know what? People have thought that for a long time, and so far everyone's been wrong. And so while I think that and they didn't think it randomly, they thought it because they saw things. I think you have to act as though you're not, until people start floating. Until the rapture comes, act like the rapture's not here. You have to act like, you know what, this is a bad thing and we should do something to stop it. You can appreciate the martyrdom these people are going through, but we should try to stop the martyrdom. And I said recently, people look back at the Holocaust and go, well, gee, how did that happen? And I'm kind of seeing a little bit of how it happened, which is people just aren't paying attention to it. And as I say, when I was in the Middle East, this is not me catching a problem that nobody else is seeing. They're aware of this in the Middle East. The Pope has talked about it. Some religious leaders in America have talked about it. Rand Paul has spoken about it at the Value Voters Conference. But you know what? It's not, but he's talked a lot more about the NSA. A lot more. And I don't know or understand what makes a story catch on and be sexy. In other words, I don't know why a Trayvon Martin story takes over our national consciousness, or the Bundy story takes over, or Lacey Peterson, or Kim Kardashian, or anything else. I don't know. What I do know is the stuff that's important, and this is one of those things. And so, like I say, it's been, Becca knows, I am constantly honest. so
almost brutally, brutally and painfully honest. Almost brutally and painfully honest. But
I really do appreciate that. And to even, I mean, you're saying you don't know, and I'm not sure if that's just rhetorical or not. But my suggestion to that is that I think the reason why it's the story is not, quote, sexy is because no one understands or no one values religious freedom.
Well,
and I think it's and I really think it's and when I say no one, I'm speaking of those in the American church. I'm not speaking of those worldwide. I'm speaking strictly those in the United States. Those people, those pastors, and not all of them, but a significant number of them would go out here and not really value what's going on because they look at it as, well, that's over there versus I'm over here and the twain shall never meet.
Well, what's interesting to me about that, though, is the over there. I said this before, but I just want to hammer it home. The over there we're talking about is the Holy Land. In other words, the most repressive country for Christians on earth is North Korea. Okay?
Absolutely.
North Korea is awful. That being said, it's not the Holy Land. In other words, Jesus wasn't walking around, Pyongyang.
Pyongyang,
right?
Yeah, I got
it. Right. And so what's happening in North Korea deserves people's attention. It deserves people's focus. It deserves people's money. However, it's not historic. If they can push Christianity out of the Holy Land, there's no other word than it's historic. It's history making and not in a good way. And so, while I get, like I say, I get that. I also, there are, look, there are. I think another factor is there's not a ton of money in this. There just isn't. There's not a big profit margin in this, and so the people who are able to push stories,
right?
Why? Well, so why did the Lacey Peterson? Let's take that, the Lacey Peterson murder.
Okay, let's take that one.
Why did that become stuck in people's consciousness? Well,
two reasons.
Yeah, go ahead.
Two reasons. First reason is Lacey Peterson was photogenic.
Sure, yeah.
That's the first reason. Because let's face it, sex sells a paper.
Yeah.
Bottom line. The second reason is not only she was photogenic, she was murdered heinously, and she was pregnant. So you have not only the sexy part of the story, you also have the heinous murder of a pregnant woman, which is a human interest story just right off the top. But here's the wild part thing about Lacey Peterson that has really just kind of floored me, and nobody caught on through the mainstream media, and that is this. How is it that somebody like Lacey Peterson, who gets brutally murdered, tragic story, but how does she get brutally murdered? And then not only does Scott Peterson get convicted on a double murder.
Yeah.
But they also knew the child's name in the media, the unborn child's name in the media. Scott Peterson gets convicted on a double murder, and we still claim that what's inside of a woman is not even human. How does that work?
Well, that was a really interesting thing about that story. But I got to say that even with everything you mentioned, I can point out other cases that happen where there are murders and everything else. I think part of what it is that mass advertising works. In other words, if you push a story, you could grab one out of the headlines anywhere that's not a well-known story right now. And if you push that story on CNN night after night after night, it's going to become a big story. Now, so it's a chicken or egg thing. And I think that the people who, it's funny you raise the topic you raised, because I've been really thinking and praying on this for the past week. And it's a little early to say, but I'm really pondering it. I may be done with nonfiction. I may be done with it, because I'm starting to realize that the stories I want to tell and that the subject I'm interested in, I may be able to be more honest about them by writing fiction. I may be able to cover them in a better way through writing fiction about them. And so, for instance, I have an idea going around my head that would make a great novel. It would make a good thriller. And it allows me to talk about campaign finance issues. But it's got the elements that you need for a successful thriller novel. It's got violence, it's got sex, it's got and again, I'm just talking about the way you would see in any best-selling book. I'm not talking about anything more heinous or weird or explicit than anything there. But it allows me to talk about some of the wider issues, including some of the Christian issues that I'm interested in the subject.
Let me ask this real quick. How has just what you were saying made me think of something. How has the prevalence of YouTube and the ability of people to pretty much make their own television shows, their own television series viral, affected what you do, affected making documentaries and nonfiction to this point?
Well, I mean, one of the ways is that it used to be that you'd make a documentary and then you'd have to figure out distribution, right?
Right.
Well, because I'm trying to crowdfund the documentaries, I have a distribution channel. In other words, if I could raise them, like I say, on this project, on the Crisis for Christians in the Middle East, Al Qaeda project, right? If I could raise the money, which again, the total budget in the Caliphate, I think I'm trying to raise right now I think we're down to about $50,000, okay, which is in the scheme. You can see that with the Gosnell film. They're trying to raise $2 million for the film. We're trying, I say this all the time. 50,000 is nothing for filmmaking. That's what I mean. It's nothing, okay? And I'm able to do the film for that budget because I can do a lot. I know how to shoot. I know how to edit. I know how to do graphics. I've done all of that professionally. So if I could raise the 50,000 to make that film, I have distribution built in, which is YouTube. There's nothing keeping me from putting the entire film up on YouTube. And if it were up on YouTube, it would have accessibility to everybody basically in the world instantly for free. So it used to be the trick was distribution. Like how do I get the film so people can see that? Well, that problem is solved. That problem is solved. I don't even care about selling the film into, like for instance, if we could sell the film into net, if we got the budget and could do the film, I'd like to have the film go out in theaters a little bit. And we could four-wall theaters, which means you rent the whole theater and then people show up, right? So why do you do that? Why do you do a theatrical distribution? I will let you in on a secret of film marketing.
Okay.
The reason you do a theatrical release is it creates a sense of value for the film. In other words, if a film goes directly to video without ever hitting theaters, people know in the back of their head it's like, well, that's not worth very much then. But if
that makes sense. No, it makes sense to me.
So psychologically, this is what they tell you, by the way, when you study film distribution, which I've done. You want a theatrical release because psychologically people go like, well, somebody paid $10 to see that. Therefore, if I get it now on HBO, oh look, I'm getting $500 worth of films this month or whatever, right? Well, if it never hit theaters, there's a psychological impact. But that's why. So it's pretty easy to get films in theaters, right?
Right.
However, so we could do that, but if I put the film straight up on YouTube, Netflix doesn't pay very much. So maybe I could get, $5,000 from Netflix or something like that to put the film up on Netflix. But you know what? That would restrict the film from people seeing it. So I've actually thought about that, that the problem of distribution is solved. So YouTube actually makes it possible for more people to see it. Now the trick is financing it. So I wouldn't dream of trying to raise on this film $500,000. We don't need to do that. But to get the film finished the way I conceived it when I came up with it, I need to go back to the Middle East. I need to shoot. I need to spend a few weeks editing. I need to hire someone to do editing. I need to license footage, and I need to, do a few things like that. I've added it up. The budget's up there. It's $50,000. Again, what do you do if we don't reach that goal? And what you do is you fall back and you go, okay, what can I do? What can I do with what I have? And we could be, I don't know. I mean, I'm not done trying to raise money on the film, and I'm not done trying to raise money from a variety of sources. In other words, is there a possibility of getting a grant? Maybe. I don't know. I'm working on that. But even just a big donor coming in, somebody who can write a $10,000, $20,000 check, would completely change where we are in the film. And we like the $5 donations too. Some people giving $5 means more than some people writing a $10,000 check, because if you're really broke and you give $5, I appreciate that. And if you're a gazillionaire and you give 10,000, you didn't feel it as much as the person who gave $5 did. So every donation counts, but it's like I say, it's difficult. It really has gotten to a point where I'm trying to figure out what the next move ahead is, because the options are narrowing on what I can do at this point. But the interviews we got last week in D.C. are so great. And you mentioned the Claire Lopez thing and how clear it is. If I can take some credit for that, that was like take 5. Because, and Claire was great, and she knows the material. But I know exactly what I wanted to get. And so I would say, okay, that was great. Can you now explain who the Muslim Brotherhood is? So I get it all in one thing. Now, I've got over an hour of Claire. So what you're seeing in that one clip is sort of like the beginning of the film. It's going to be cut up and edited with other stuff. But the reason she was so clear is because I told her, I said, this is for, pretend you're explaining to somebody who doesn't know anything. They don't know who the Muslim Brotherhood is. They don't know anything. And then she just hit it out of the park. But it was me setting her up with that, saying, like, look, this is
what
the goal.
You wanted, yeah.
Yeah, this is the goal. This is what we want. And then, like I say, she hit it out of the park. So, as a director, you're kind of a coach in a sense. You're not hitting the ball. I'm not on camera, but I can make sure she's successful for what I'm trying to do.
You're pitching the ball for.
That's right.
Right, for her to hit. I had another question, and I know we're going to possibly wrap up shortly, but I know another aspect to the Caliphate film is Benghazi and Hillary Clinton. If you can go into some of your research on that.
Well, you can't talk about the situation that's happening in Syria without talking about the Obama and the Clinton administration's involvement in what's happened. And Benghazi directly relates to Syria because part of what was going on there was the U.S. was using Libya and Benghazi, the city of Benghazi, the port city of Benghazi, as a way to get arms to the Syrian rebels that we were supporting. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the CIA was involved there. All over the place. And the Obama administration and the Clinton State Department was heavily involved in that. So you literally, Benghazi, because, see what was happening in Benghazi, right? So we talk about the CIA annex that was attacked. We know that the mission was attacked. That's where Stevens was killed and where Sean Smith was killed. Glenn Doherty and Ty Woods were killed on the roof by mortar fire of the CIA annex, right? Except the CIA annex was not really the annex. The annex implies that it's like an extra thing, like the main thing was the mission. That's not what was happening. The main thing that was going on in Benghazi was this CIA operation that had to do with getting up weapons and getting them into Syria. So Claire Lopez, I have her talking extensively about how Chris Stevens was one of the go-betweens to make that weapons trade happen. And Claire talks about it extensively. Now, the other thing that's happened in Benghazi, and again, so we know what there's two narratives. There's the Democrat narrative, which is don't talk about it. What difference does it make now? Yeah. That's their narrative. The Republican narrative is about blaming the video was wrong and blah, blah, blah. Well, I've extensively researched it. There's not a question in the world that the video, The Innocence of Muslims, was a factor in that attack. Now, I think that other things were a factor in that attack, too. And I think part of the problem that people have when they look at Benghazi is they're getting these two false narratives, the Democrat false narrative and, frankly, the Republican false narrative. And they can't look at it. You have to look at, there were two attacks that night in Benghazi that in my opinion, are distinct. There was the attack on the mission where a bunch of people showed up with rifles and RPGs, and it was chaos. Then there was the attack later on the CIA annex, but where it's really distinct is where the mortars hit. That mortar fire was directed mortar fire that it was not random. That was
what makes you say that it's not randomly?
Well, a couple reasons. Number one, there are newspaper reports of a Libyan commander who was there when the mortar fire attack happened, and he says it's not random. So I could show you that from September 12th in the papers overseas, where this guy's quoted saying that. He said, these were very direct hits. I also spoke to people in Washington last week who confirmed two things for me. I've not talked about this yet. Number one, a stand-down order was definitely given.
Okay.
Wow.
And I have this from somebody who has it firsthand, off the record, that a stand-down order was definitely given. So I don't want to reveal what the source is, but so I don't want to say much more. But it's as confirmed as I've ever heard it from somebody who's in a position to know. So that's A. B, that they also said, this is somebody who was there, that the mortar hit. I've never shot a mortar. But the way it works is there's kind of two ways you can do it. You can fire your mortar and it lands somewhere, and then someone tells you, okay, it hit here. You want to go, you want to bring it in 200 yards to the north, 500 yards to the west. So then you fire again, and they try it again, right?
Right.
That's one way to do it. You fire, you look where the shot landed, you recalibrate, you fire again. But the other way to do it is you pre-survey, okay? You know the exact position that you want to hit. And you usually don't do that at night, and it takes a while to do that. Those mortar hits hit the target directly. There was not like a whole bunch of mortar hits and then it eventually got there. So that's one of the reasons people say that, is those mortar hits were very, very, very directed. And I think that indicates that there's two different attacks. In other words, no one talks about this, but I don't think that the same guys who attacked with the rifles and RPGs then went back to their mortars, right? In other words, I don't think it's Ali Smith or whatever, and then he puts down his rifle, goes back. Okay, now hey guys, I'm going to go back to the mortar.
No, that didn't happen.
It was two distinct groups of human beings, right?
Absolutely.
And therefore, I think it could be two distinct groups of command and control with two distinct motives. Okay, the attack that happened on the mission. There's no doubt in my mind that the video was a factor there. And we know this because the video actually, no one in the United States, very few people know this, the Innocence of Muslims video caused gigantic riots around the world, including Pakistan and Sydney, Australia, where there were gigantic, 22 people were killed in Pakistan. But none of them were Americans, so we don't talk about that. But 22 Pakistanis were killed in riots explicitly over the video. In Australia, you can see there's video, it's up on YouTube. They fought with police. There were gigantic violent riots about this. So one of the reasons I think that even politically correct Republicans don't want to bring this up is it doesn't look good for Muslims as a whole if they freaked out about that video to the point where they caused rioting in 24 countries. But they did. They did. It makes it seem like a lot of Muslims are on a hair trigger and are willing to go on violent rampages where people die over a stupid video. So, but that's clearly the case, and I think it's also clearly the case. And when I say clearly the case in Benghazi, there's video. Fox doesn't show it, but there's video of a guy screaming about as the mission's burning in the background. On September 11, 2012, a guy screaming about the video. And there you go. I mean, someone, occasionally people, I show that to people, and a lot of times people go, huh, I've never seen that. Sometimes people go, well, how do we know he wasn't a plant? To which I just smack my head. Because I'd have to have some proof that he was a plant. And it's a fallacy post hoc where people, they get it in their head that the video was not the cause. Then they go back and they try to justify things that happened before to prove that it wasn't. But again, you can't think of anything in the Middle East as binary. You can't think of it as either or. There were 2 attacks in Benghazi. They were related, I think. I think it was probably ultimately Ansar al-Sharia behind both of them. But that doesn't mean that there weren't 2 attacks separated by hours, because there were. And I think one group was doing one thing and another group was doing something else. That's just it's pretty clear to me looking at the facts. So that's all going to go in the film, by the way.
Yep.
Very interesting. Like I said, I kind of concur and agree with your findings concerning that there were 2 completely separate teams, because it doesn't make any sense to me how that could happen, especially when that structure took direct mortar fire.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So the problem is that people I'm telling you, this film is not. Becca saw the footage of David Dubois. This film is not kind to John McCain. If you don't like Hillary Clinton, you will like this film, because it's not kind to Obama or Hillary either. I am brutally honest about Obama and Clinton's involvement in what's gone on. But I got to tell you, John McCain is not a good guy here, and he doesn't come off as a good guy. And look, Republicans and Democrats have a vested interest in not having the truth come out. They have a vested interest in allowing the bickering continue. I have no such interest. I don't care. I'm just trying to get to the facts of the story. And if someone presents me with something, if someone showed me a video of a guy screaming about Christopher Stevens, for instance, and saying, we're here to kidnap him, I wouldn't ignore that evidence at all. But I also can't ignore the evidence of a guy screaming about the video or the other things that I know that led up to the attack. So
right.
I just don't have a dog in the hunt. I'm not trying to protect Republicans. I'm not trying to protect Democrats. I'm just trying to get to the truth. And what I've learned is that that's apparently a bad financial model. what I've learned is I think you make more money if you attack one side or the other. But it's not what I'm interested in doing. So
exactly, and I agree with you that it's in America, and I can't speak for the rest of the world, but in America, it's always the us versus them paradigm in nearly anything that we do. And to me, that's kind of like saying, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's one of those things where, especially when you're dealing with politics, is it possible that both parties are at fault? Of course it is.
Yeah. And we're gonna do that in the nonfiction film. But as I say, really, I'm very, very close to just announce that. Just saying, like, you know what? I'm just gonna do it. I'm just gonna do this through fiction, because the thing is, I know a lot of things now. Here's the other issue that's happened. I know a lot of things in politics now that I can't talk about because I have them off the record. But
sure.
if I write a novel and I leave it to then I stop answering questions about it. If I write a novel, I'll let people decide whether I made up that detail or whether I'm basing it on something that I know. And I've thought this for a while. I've thought this since the John Edwards story, actually, when I covered the John Edwards affair, that I'd rather do that as a fictional story because I know so much about it that it's just more interesting to me to tell it fictionally, even though I'd include a lot of truth. And I'm almost to the point, like I say, where I'm just like, you know what, that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to, when I see the popularity of a show like House of Cards on Netflix, or like Scandal on ABC or the Good Wife or any of these shows that are sort of in the political arena, but they're fiction, I just go like, well, that's where Aaron Sorkin does okay with West Wing in the newsroom. I'm like, oh, I know more than Aaron Sorkin does. Like, he's a good writer. He's a good fiction writer. He knows what he's doing. A Few Good Men, Aaron Sorkin's A Few Good Men. Still, people quote that you can't handle the truth speech. That's the sign of a writer who's had some impact, right? I don't agree with his politics, but that's the beauty I have, is I don't have to agree. I don't agree with his politics. Therefore, if being the Aaron Sorkin of the right or something like that, I'm not interested in doing what a guy like Brad Thor does. He does something different, and I love what Brad does. We have writers on the right. Tom Clancy did a certain kind of thing. I'm not a military guy. I don't know that stuff. I didn't come from that background. Whatever. That's not. But I know the world of politics really, really well now, and I know the world of media really, really well now. And if I can tell just enough of the truth, I think I can tell a lot more truth by fictionalizing. I really do. And so that's what I'm pondering, because, see, I can't drop these issues. I care about the issues, but it becomes, as a writer and an artist, you try things, you experiment with things. And if the format of nonfiction isn't working, I'll just switch and go do something else. I still want to get the issues out, but maybe a perfect example. I know a bunch of stuff about Al Sharpton. I know a lot.
He's a work of fiction just on two legs.
Yeah, or Michelle Bachmann. I know a lot of stuff about Bachmann. There's a lot of politicians I know. Alan West. There's a lot of stuff I know about people. I can't talk about it, except I could fictionalize it. And if I fictionalize it, and I throw in some stuff that I make up, and then I let other people try to discern it, it's like, oh, okay. It's fascinating stuff. I mean, politicians are not awesome. Let me just sum it up that way. Politicians. I'm very disturbed by politicians. That being said, fiction seems the right way to deal with a lot of that stuff, because you can always just hide behind the, well, you figure it out. You figure out whether what I'm talking about there is true or not true. So
it's also how they legislate. Anyway.
Yeah, no, exactly. I really, like I say, I care about these issues so much that I don't feel like dropping politics, but I do feel like the game right now is so rigged in politics. It's so rigged that I don't know what to do about that. And I can't, if people aren't interested in telling a story one way, I'll tell it a different way. Penn Jillette from Penn and Teller had a thing. He talked about movies. This is an old thing he talked about. But he said, look, if you made a little indie film, and it was about how a guy, his wife had become more successful than he has, and he's having trouble dealing with that. He's a working class guy. His wife's become successful. They're divorcing, and then he has to go through something to sort of prove that his working class life has just as much value as her executive experience, okay? He said you could make that as an indie film and 8 people would go see it. It sounds very boring, right? But he said if you throw explosions in, it's Die Hard. What I just described is Die Hard. That's the theme of Die Hard. Bruce Willis is a cop. His wife's the executive. They're split, right? That's what's going on. That's the theme going on in Die Hard. But when you have stuff blowing up, and you have Yippee-ki-yay, Mother Hubbard, and that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So when you have that, it becomes a more commercially viable product to people, and you can still explore those things. So,
well, I'm really glad.
It's one of those things that I kind of agree with you, Lee, that unfortunately people can't really handle the truth, as Nicholson eloquently so put it.
Yeah.
So they would rather say, well, I'll pay $12.50 and be lied to, and that's why fiction writers make as much as they do. That being said, that's pretty much going to be all the time that we have for this this edition of Truth Serum. Once again, my guest, Lee Stranahan, filmmaker extraordinaire, in the making of The Caliphate and Saving Kassab. Hopefully, we'll be able to see it either on a computer or a theater near us. For Taylor Millard and Becca Lord, I'm Gerald Harrison, where this is Truth Serum, and the Doctor of Truth is always in.